Hey everybody, tonight I am here to talk about the number one thing that is silently or subtly killing your relationship and how you can change it. So I'm Natalie Ford. I'm a dating and relationship coach, and I specialize in supporting people to create healthy relationships or conscious relationships. This is where you show up as your best self in your relationship, and you relearn how to rewire your brain to change aspects of yourself that are causing toxic behaviors or unhelpful behaviors in your relationship. So the number one thing that is subtly killing your relationship, and you may not even realize, is actually the way that you handle stress and conflict in the relationship. This is true for all of us. So there are a number of main stress responses. Let's talk about four main ones. That when you behave in these certain ways, you either withdraw from the connection or you damage the connection, and you create certain dynamics, which we'll go into, which weaken your relationship. Now, you might be thinking, yeah, but everybody fights and that's just normal, and it's something that can't be avoided. And you're absolutely right. Everybody does fight. And actually, it's healthy to fight in a relationship. Relationships where people don't fight are the ones that are great until they're not. And then they fall apart when they have a major fight, because they don't know how to handle what we call rupture and repair. This is where you have a fight and then you make good afterwards. You actually heal the relationship afterwards. And this, how you learn to repair after a fight, is actually super important. In fact, almost one of the most important things as to how you can build a strong, healthy relationship that will genuinely last long term. So let's look at the major stress response reactions that you might be having. So in no particular order, the first one is to go into freeze. This means that when conflict arises in your relationship, or when there's any sort of fight or difficult situation, you and your nervous system sort of freeze. Like that, you might look a little bit like a deer in the headlights, like your eyes might be quite wide, like I'm doing right now. Your body will tense up. Your breathing will almost stop. You'll find yourself almost holding your breath and just thinking, actually, you probably aren't actually thinking anything, but if any part of you is managing to have a thought in a freeze process, it's like, I don't know what to say. I don't know what to do. I'm literally, the voice box will close up. You'll struggle to speak. You might go blank. Your mind, if you think of, standing up to present in front of a room full of people and your mind goes blank, that is a freeze response. So first one, freeze response. Now, let's go through each of the responses first, and then I'll talk about how they negatively impact your relationship. So second one we're going to look at is the flight response. Now, I'm sure you will have heard of this one. Is exactly the same type of scenario. You're having a fight or a conflict, or you're suddenly put on the spot in a difficult situation, and you just want to get out of there. You're like, screw this, I'm out of here. And all you want to do is leave the room or leave the situation, or if you're on a phone call, you want to put down the phone. Whatever it is, you just want to get out of there. You want to be somewhere else. This is a really inbuilt survival mechanism. If you think about, a deer when it is being stalked by a lion, the first thing it does is run, right? It wants to run. It wants to get out of there. So this is a really natural response. In fact, even the freeze response is really natural too. We'll talk about that. Maybe I'll go deeper on that on a different live stream, the different nervous system responses and how our vagus nerve handles all of that, but that's probably too deep for this one. So the flight response is the second response, and yeah, you'll know because you'll just think, I don't want to be here. I just want to get out of here. You may not actually leave the room, because if you have been conditioned as a child to not leave the situation, then you might really desperately want to leave, but you have been trained so well to sit there and not do that. So yeah, it doesn't necessarily mean that you do leave. It just means that that's the desire. The desire is to not be there. So number 3, the fight response. This is my go-to, or it has been in the past. And actually, if I'm really pushed to my limits, it's still my go-to. The fight response is basically anger, frustration, resentment. It all comes out, and you get a huge surge of energy in your body, and you think, oh, I just want to kill him. I just want to, fight. I want to fight ultimately. And often the way that comes out in fighting in relationships is verbal abuse, shouting, screaming, yelling, just wanting to verbally or even physically attack the person in front of you. We'll talk, obviously, there's some obvious dangers around this one, but we'll talk about all of the dangers in a moment. So that's your fight response. That's number 3. Number 4 is what we call it's called the Fawn response, FAWN, or the tend and befriend. Same thing. It's where you learned as a child that actually your best way out of a really difficult situation was to try and become this person's friend, try and suck up to them and bend over backwards. How can I please you? What can I do for you? How can I make this better? Is there anything I can get for you? And you'll notice that when your partner gets angry, you start to go into caretaker mode for them. You start to do some of the things I just said. You start to think, how can I make this person more comfortable? How can I make them happier? How can I please them so that they're not upset with me? This is known as a fawn or a tend and befriend response. So these are the 4 main responses. There are others, but I'm not going to go into the subtleties of the other ones, the nuances. And yeah, let's look now at all of these are damaging for your relationship. You might think that leaving the room or going into a freeze or even the tend and befriend one is not very damaging, because you're not really doing anything hurtful to your partner. You're not really doing anything that, could immediately cause pain to your partner, but actually you are. They're all damaging. So I'm going to explore that right now. So I'm actually going to do these in a slightly different order. Just start with the most obvious one, the fight response. Right, this has been my go-to. This is what I have worked through, and when I didn't know how damaging this response was, because I was brought up in a household where the fight response was the go-to. That's what we did in my household. We got angry with each other when there was high emotion, and we shouted at each other, and we said not very nice things, but we then always made up afterwards. Like, we was hugged and I'm sorry, I didn't really mean it, please forgive me. And I thought that made it okay. I thought as long as I was really sorry afterwards, that it made it okay. But as I went on my personal development journey, and as I softened, as I learned to feel my emotions and express them and get more in touch with my body, so more embodiment work, more authenticity work, more being true to myself in the moment and feeling my feelings and honoring my boundaries, I wanted to be with partners who could do those things too. I wanted to be with a partner who, knew who he was and could express that and could be with his emotions and feel them and not feel shame around, feeling sadness or anger or fear or not knowing or any of the emotional ranges. And I wanted somebody who was sensitive to my feelings, who didn't shut me down, who didn't make me wrong, who could see that I was having an emotional response and say, hey, you look like you're really sad in this moment. Do you need something? Can I help you? Can I support you in some way? Or, hey, I see that you're really angry. Do we need to talk about something, or do you need to take some space? Or, how can I support you in this moment? Whatever the thing is, offering me love and kindness in that moment. But as I started to attract these beautiful, beautiful men, these heart-centered, conscious men who were emotionally sensitive, were emotionally attuned, and knew how to love and be kind to me, even when I was wobbling and really not in a good space in myself, I didn't know how to show up differently at this point. I'd learned to connect with myself, but I hadn't yet got to the point of rewiring my nervous system to respond differently in my moments of stress. So my stress responses were still the same. And they were still that of anger and shouting and raising my voice, frustration, and generally quite aggressive. I was never physically aggressive with people, but I was verbally very attacking and very hurtful in actually the things I would say because I was hurting. And in that moment when I hurt so much because of what I had heard or perceived or what I thought had happened to me, my perception of the situation, I hurt so much because I was still carrying a lot of wounding, and I wanted somebody else to hurt as much as me. I wanted them to feel the pain that they'd inflicted on me. So yeah, I was very vicious with the words that I would use, and my tone would increase dramatically. I would get very loud and very animated, and I actually genuinely wanted the other person to hurt because I was hurting, and I wanted them to feel the pain that I thought that they had inflicted on me. It turns out later down the line that that's not true, but that's again a different live stream that I'll cover at some point in time. If you would love me to cover any of the things that I'm shelving, please do put it in the chat, because it will act as a reminder for me to be like, oh yeah, I said I'd cover that, and I'll come back to it. So the anger response, why is this so damaging? If you're someone who's been on the receiving end of anger, you will know. Like, you'll be like, duh, this is so obvious. But for those of us like me that grew up in a household where anger was normal, it's actually not so obvious to us. It really isn't that obvious because it was so normalized as we grew up as children. So let me speak into that, and then I'll cover the other ones as well. So if you weren't brought up in a household where anger was the go-to expression of emotion, which a lot of people haven't been. Like, if you're like me and you were brought up in that environment, you assume everybody does that, right? You assume, well, this is just normal. That's what everybody does. Because we all have a habit of assuming that our default reaction and our default way of being is what everybody does. That's just how humans sort of work. They assume that, oh, well, I'm normal, and so everybody else must do it. But actually, if you haven't been brought up in this environment, you're not prepared for anger when it comes at you, that you're not wearing a layer of armor and protection, which those of us that were brought up in that household are. By default, we are wearing a layer of armor and protection at all times because we learned as children that we needed to. And actually, our journey is to, throughout life, our journey is to learn to take off that armor and to be without it, to allow ourselves to be vulnerable and seen, and to trust, to dare to trust that somebody isn't going to hurt us. Again, a future live stream. But those of us that weren't brought up in that way are not guarded already. They're not expecting that. It's just not in their awareness. So when we go into an elevated state of anger or frustration, or raising the volume on our expression, or starting to use hurtful language, the poor person that we love and adore, who is always going to be the brunt of these things, because it always comes out with those that we have the closest relationship with, because they're the ones that can hurt us the most. They are not prepared for what is coming. And so if you can imagine a really like unprotected, vulnerable child, and then suddenly you are stabbing them with a knife, or even, hitting them with stones and sticks, if you don't want to, go to the gory blood details. Sorry if that was a little too graphic. It's going to really hurt. And this is why it's so damaging for your relationship. It breaks the trust. That person trusted you to look after their heart, trusted you to be tender and gentle and safe with them. And most of the time you are, right? Most of the time you love them and adore them, and you are those things. But in your moments when you have a stress reaction, you're not. and they don't see it coming because they haven't been brought up that way. They're not, trained to see it coming. And so there's a huge breach of trust. Huge. Like, I cannot stress to you how strong this breach of trust is. And it's very difficult for them to recover from that. And they will try, because these people love you. Like, whoever it is, be it your partner or your friends or your family, whoever it is, they will try because they love you and you're an amazing person and they want to be in relationship with you. So they will try desperately to build love with you again, build trust with you again. But the next time you explode in a ball of anger at them, that trust is broken again and again and again. And there's only so many times that somebody can repair from that breach of trust before they eventually say, I can't do this anymore. And I know that you know this, because if you're watching this live stream, you've probably been left. You've probably been abandoned by people who said they loved you, but then who left because they couldn't handle your stress response. It's really painful. I know, I've been there. I was left by so many people, friends, as well as partners. And it was only because I kept repeating the pattern and kept experiencing the pain over and over again that I eventually thought, Jesus, I have to do something about this. Like, I can't keep hurting myself in this way by hurting others and then causing them to leave. But for years and years, I didn't realize I was the problem. I just thought people seemed to date me and fall in love with me, but then after a period of time, they seemed to stop loving me and leave. I had no idea that actually it was my stress response that was killing my relationships over and over and over again. So that's the anger response. Of course, this one is the most obvious, but let me speak to the others, because they are also killing your relationship in possibly a more silent way. So the flight response. When you can't stand to be around someone who is expressing emotions or even bringing up a challenge to you, even if they're not particularly emotional, they're just bringing up something and saying, hey, I need to talk to you about that. This isn't, this isn't okay for me, or it's not working for me, or, we need to navigate this and find a different way. If you dread that feedback, if you dread that moment of when they say, hey, we need to talk about something, if that for you is like the deepest, like, oh my God, like, what's going to happen? You are in a stress response, a fear response. And if your default go-to is either to leave the room, or another thing that I've seen people do, which is more subtle, and it can lead you into a false sense of believing that actually you're not doing the flight response when actually you are, but in a different way, is you might be able to navigate the conversation in the moment, but then you take a huge pause on communication from that person for like the next 3 days, 4, 5 days, 7 days, whatever it is. But you might be able to navigate the communication in the moment, but then you need so much space to recover from it. That is also a flight response. And the reason why this is so damaging, even though it may not, you might be thinking, but I'm not hurting anybody. You're not hurting anybody with words, and you're not hurting with anybody by throwing anger at them. Yes, that is true, but you are abandoning them emotionally. And that is extremely painful to be on the receiving end of, particularly if that person already has an abandonment wound, which many, many, many of us do. So when you don't communicate clearly that, hey, I'm having a difficult time and I do want to work through this, but I need some space and I will come back. And if you don't communicate that, and if you equally don't come back when you said you would, or you don't stay in communication, all of those things can be experienced by your partner as abandonment. And that also breaks the trust, because that person dared to trust that you would be there for them when things got tough, that you would stay and work through the difficult challenges when they arose. And if you If your stress response is causing you not to be able to do that, then that trust that you will be there, that trust that you are in this and that you're going to stay through the difficult moments and that you're going to work through the things and that you're going to meet somebody, emotionally meet somebody in that moment of challenge, that trust is broken. It's like the person went to lean on you in that moment to say, hey, there's some difficulty here. Can we navigate it together? And when they leaned on you, you went backwards and they fell down. It's like the trust fall, but you don't catch them. And that feeling that it creates within them is extremely difficult, extremely painful. And yeah, I could go on. So you can see how this also creates a breach of trust, which again, this person loves you, they want to be with you, they see how amazing you are, and your friends and your family, whoever you're doing this with, because it will come up everywhere. This, if you have a stress response, it will come up every time you're stressed. It will come up in work, in friendships, in loverships, in relationships, in all of the things. And these people love and adore you, and they want to spend time with you, and they want to get to know you, and they want to be able to have intimacy with you and lean on you. And every time this breach of trust happens, they try to repair it, they try to build it up again. But if it keeps happening, which it will, because that's just your default stress response until you work with somebody like me to change it, then you're going to keep breaking their trust over and over. And the same with the fight response. There's only so many times that somebody can feel abandoned in a relationship before they say, I just can't do this anymore. It's just so painful, so deeply painful to be abandoned over and over again. I can't do this. So that's number 2. Let's look at the freeze response, number 3. The freeze, why is this damaging to just sit there? You're like, I'm not saying anything. I'm not leaving. So I'm not the one who's abandoning, and I'm not attacking. So I'm not doing either of those two things. So you can lead yourself into a false belief that, hey, I'm not doing anything, that's damaging to my relationship. But all of these responses are damaging. So I'm not picking on anyone individually. And as I say, like I've actually done all of these. Even though fight response was my strongest response, I have abandoned situations, I have frozen, and I have done the tend and befriend as well. So I've been there, I've done all of them. I know why you show up that way. I totally get it. I totally understand it. I've been there, I've done it myself, and I have worked through all of these pieces. And I really understand the psychology and the emotional experience behind what goes on here. So please hear me when I say that this is not about, any one individual. Why is it damaging to go into freeze? Because in that moment, you have lost the ability to be responsive. And you've lost the ability to stay in connection because you can no longer respond. You're no longer emotionally present. You're no longer psychologically present. And that's purely because of the response your nervous system is having. It's not you're doing something wrong, you're doing something bad. None of these are. Your nervous system, your vagus nerve, has gone into what we call a dorsal freeze, which is a stress response in your nervous system. It's learned from a very young age. It can be rewired, as can all of these. So don't worry, there is hope. But in that moment, you're not available to be in connection with your partner. So whilst you might be sat there, you've not left the room and you've not attacked them. It's like talking to a brick wall. I don't know if you've ever had that experience with somebody of like, you're talking to them, but they're just no response coming here. Like, it's like they've checked out, and you're just like, it's very confusing to be on the other end of this, because the person looks like they're there, right? You look like you're there. You're not there. Not psychologically and emotionally, you're not there. So there is, once again, this sense of abandonment. It's lesser, to a lesser degree, but there is a sense of emotional abandonment. Like, where is this person? Why are they not meeting me? And it might evoke frustration or anger in the other person, because confusion arises, and confusion is often dealt with. Confusion often leads to frustration, which then often leads to anger. So the confusion is like, I don't understand what's happening. This person is still here, but they're not saying anything and they're not doing anything. And I don't know how I need to behave or what I need to do, like, to get a response from them. So there may be an attempt from the other person to try to get a response out of you, which, yeah, can look like a number of things. So it's damaging for the relationship because it creates, again, a breach of trust. This breach of trust that when I bring you a problem, you don't meet me in that. There's no coming together in that. You sit there and you still seem to be present in your body physically, but you've checked out. And it's very confusing for the other person. So they learn that when I bring you something difficult or something vulnerable, I'm going to be met with confusion and abandonment. And it's that, again, will only play out so many times. What will probably happen is the person will have their own stress response because now they are also stressed by your response. Actually, all of the stress responses cause stress response in the other, so this is not unique, but it's more evident in the freeze response that the other person goes into a stress response and nobody really knows how to get out of this. You're both lost, you're both confused. And yeah, it could cause a breach of trust over and over again. So that's the third one. And the fourth one is this fawn response, the tend and befriend. You might be wondering, how is this damaging? Because you're being so nice, right? You're bending over backwards to please the other person. But the reason it's damaging is because you are not being authentic. You might think that in the moment that is the most authentic thing to do, but it's actually not. When you tune in to the deeper layers that are underneath this fear response to try and be the best friend and to do whatever the other person needs so that they are no longer a threat to you, you will realize that actually your authentic response is something else. It's probably actually one of the other three stress responses. It's probably either a freeze that you are trying to mask by pretending to be lovely and friendly, or you might actually really want to get out of there. You might be suppressing a flight response, or underneath this happy, smiley, how can I help you? There might be deep anger and deep rage that you've also learned to suppress. So your authentic reaction is not to bend over backwards and please. Your authentic reaction is probably more likely to say, I'm scared. I'm actually really deeply scared in this moment and I don't know what to do. So I'm going to fawn or tend and befriend you because that's what I learned as a child would help me get out of these situations. Now, the reason why this is damaging for relationships is because in that moment, you're wearing a mask, a big, big people-pleasing mask. You're not authentic. And so the other person is like, I don't really get it. I don't really get what's going on here. Like, the other person will feel that you're not being authentic, and they will probably sense eventually that you're wearing a mask, and it breaks the trust over and over again because suddenly you are no longer yourself. And so the person that your partner is in relationship with has changed and is no longer who they're actually in relationship with. So this sense of betrayal can actually arise, this sense of, I don't know who you are. I don't know who this person is in front of me. And again, it creates an experience of confusion. And yeah, this sense of betrayal and breach of trust, which again, this for all of these, regardless of which style you have for the, I don't think I explicitly said it, but for the freeze style, the people that are in your life love you and adore you and want to be in friendship and relationship with you. And if you have a fawn style or a tend and befriend style, that's true too. Your friends, your family, your partners, they love and adore you. They see how amazing you are and they want to be in relationship with you, which is why they're still here. It's why they're still trying to figure it out with you, right? And there's only so many times that they can keep experiencing this breach of trust or this betrayal over and over again before they get to a point where they're like, I can't do this anymore. I can't do this anymore. So you can see how the impact of your stress reaction can negatively impact your relationship. And you can see possibly some things that you're doing that are not actually very helpful. Now, what can you do differently going forward? Well, it's the same process. I mean, the process is slightly different for each of you, but under the hood, it's the same thing. And this is how I work with all of my one-to-one clients. And this is the process I took for myself as well. So first of all, number one, we have to realize that we're in a stress response. We have to realize I've gone into freeze, or I've gone into fawning, or I've gone into wanting to run away, or I've suddenly got really angry. So number one, notice that you're having a stress response. Number two, don't make yourself wrong for it. You're gonna have to do some work around not making yourself wrong, not criticizing yourself, not shaming yourself for having that reaction, because it's completely normal. It's actually not even your brain. Well, it's not your conscious brain that's having that reaction. You're not consciously choosing this. You're not consciously making it happen. It's happening on a survival limbic brain process. Like, it's the reptilian brain part of you that is having this survival response process, and it's not something that you can control when you're in it without a huge amount of relearning and rewiring, which is what I do with my one-to-one clients. So not making yourself wrong for having that experience. Number three, always, regardless of which of those responses you have, take time out. Ask for time out. Say, oh, wow, I notice I'm having a stress response, or you can call it a trigger reaction. It's the same thing. I notice that I'm triggered. I notice that I'm having a response or a reaction to this. I still do this when it happens with my partner, like in our relationship. There'll be times when he says something. He doesn't mean to trigger me. He doesn't mean to say something that upsets me by any means. It might be a really innocent comment on his part. And I will notice and just say to him, whoa, okay, I noticed I'm having a reaction to that. Give me a minute. Just give me a minute, because I need to work out what's going on for me. So depending where you're at on your journey, depending on how far, how much work you've done of this nature, the amount of time you're going to need is going to be different, and that's okay. So first of all, ask for time out. Acknowledge that you're having a response. Ask for time out. Now, one caveat I do need to put here, because sometimes I work with clients who have been in abusive relationships and have been brought up with narcissistic parents or abusive parents. And what I would do differently with clients like that, if you've been brought up in an environment where if you dared to show any vulnerability, it was used against you, then don't name actually what's going on for you. Don't say that you're having a triggered response. If you don't trust the integrity of the person that you are having this conversation with, don't name anything vulnerable. Just remove yourself from the situation. You can, if it feels safe to do so, you can say, and actually you could even make an excuse. You could even say, I need the toilet, or I need to go for a walk, or something, if that feels safer for you to do. But let them know that you need to take a pause and then go do that. And in that time, step 4, in that time, what you want to do is work out what's going on for you. Now, this is something you get much, much better at with time and with support from somebody like me, a coach or a therapist, where I teach my clients like very quick and effective tools to get right down to the root of what it is that has triggered them, what it is that has caused this emotional response. Because once you know what it is, you can do something about it, right? So that's not something I can teach you on a YouTube video. That's something you would need to come and work with me one-to-one, or come into one of my group programs. That's something that we do for women in Soul Aligned Love Mastermind as well. But I also teach it one-to-one for people of all genders. So you want to take that space and time out to work out what has triggered me. And then once you get to the root of knowing what it is that has triggered you, you want to get emotionally neutral about it. That's step number 5. So you want to do some emotional release processes. That might just be screaming into a pillow, and if you do scream, make sure it comes from your belly, not from your throat, because you'll hurt your throat, but like a belly scream, a low vibrational belly scream from into a pillow. Or you might want to don't hurt yourself. Don't punch any solid objects. Definitely no punching walls or doors. No, you don't want to hurt yourself. This is not an act of self-hate. It's an act of self-love. So you want to maybe punch some soft pillows, or punch a soft mattress, or a soft sofa. Make sure it doesn't hurt yourself and you don't damage the item as well. But you want to find some way to get that emotion out. If you're in a freeze response or a flight response, actually, if you're in a flight, going for like something like a walk or a run's great, because you're physically leaving, and so you actually play out the response your nervous system needs. If you're in a freeze, you're going to want to actually do some defreezing techniques, which is something also I teach my clients. So you could always message me about that. So number 5, you actually want to move through the emotions so you can get emotionally neutral and bring yourself back down to, if you think of like a scale, 0 to 10 of how emotionally activated you are. 0 is like you're completely neutral, nothing's going on, you're really calm. 10 is like you're really triggered, whatever that looks like for you, but you're the most activated that you get. You do not want to come back to this conversation until you are below a 5, ideally below a 4, ideally lower. If you are a 5, or even worse, sorry, I don't mean to say worse, even higher, like a 6, 7, 8, do not go back to that conversation. Do whatever needs to happen, release your emotions until you can get to at least a 5 maximum. Then you can come back to that conversation, and then you can say whatever needs to be said in that conversation. But the main thing is you want to get out of your stress response. You want to calm your nervous system by doing the steps I've just laid out, so that you can get below a 5 on your activation scale and communicate from a place of calm and groundedness. And the reason why we find the root of your trigger is because then you get to come back to your partner. Wow, that thing that you said to me, I know you didn't mean anything by it, but actually it really activated me because of X, Y, and Z. So like the example I gave with my partner, I would come back to him and say, wow, when you said, hey, Natalie, would you mind doing the washing up? I know you didn't mean anything by that, but the tone in your voice sounded frustrated, and that that made me feel really scared, like I'd done something wrong, like I was in trouble, and I went into a fear or a stress response. So next time, would it be possible, like if you're feeling frustrated, just to name it, just to say, hey, actually, Natalie, I'm feeling frustrated because you haven't done the washing up. And then that way I feel a bit safer with you, because the whole thing is above board, like it's named. I know what's going on. I know that you're frustrated, and I know what needs to happen to make the situation right again. So what you can learn to do after taking this 5-step process that I've just outlined is to learn the conscious communication, which I did in my last live stream. You can check out my How to Improve Your Communication live stream, to learn how to bring these conversations to your partner or to the person that you're involved with. Now, and as I said before, if it's somebody who is abusive or narcissistic, then you will need to take a radically different approach. Don't show vulnerability. Don't say anything that could be used against you. In fact, sometimes it's better to just not have the conversation with them. If you're working through a situation like that, you can always work one-to-one with me. I can support you in those situations. So these are the 4 main stress responses. The reasons why each one of those are damaging for your relationship, because they break trust. For the reasons I spoke. And this is my 5-step process that I support my clients, and I can support you with, to learn how to rewire your nervous system so that you can show up differently. And when you do this repeatedly over a number of times, over a period of time, you actually start to rewire your nervous system, particularly if you work with what I call my secure attachment process. This is the process I teach in Soul Aligned Love Mastermind, where we get right down to the root of your trigger and we rewire it at the root. We clear out the emotional baggage that's there and we rewire it to come back to have a secure attachment with yourself, which then means all those fear responses are massively reduced and you get to stabilize your nervous system. This is the nervous system stabilization work I do with my clients too, so that you can show up differently in your moments of stress. It is completely possible with all 4 of these responses, stress responses, to rewire them. If you are willing and if you get the right support, such as working with myself or a therapist, to rewire these at a deep level in your nervous system so you can learn how it is to show up in a different way, and to also learn that you can create the safety you need through that by expressing your needs, expressing your boundaries, and also speaking, doing the healing work with your inner child and seeing what your inner child needs inside. So I hope this has been helpful for you. If it has, please do leave me a like this video. Leave me a comment below. If there's any questions you've got, anything more you'd love to know, please do comment below. I will happily cover it in a future live stream. Please follow me for more videos like this, and you can check out my links on my profile if you want to work with me or join my mailing list. I look forward to connecting with you again soon.